Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to part 2 of Morning Break. We hope you've enjoyed the show so far and stay tuned because we still have lots to come.
Now it's time to introduce our special guest. Our guest today is Sister Mahdiyya Sachoo, who is an audiologist. Assalamu alaikum, Sister.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
No, my pleasure.
Sister, I don't actually know personally what audiology is. Could you just explain to us what that is?
Okay, in a nutshell, audiology is the study of hearing imbalance. So I've learnt about different types of hearing imbalance disorders, and basically my job involves working with people who have hearing impairments, measuring their hearing, issuing hearing aids, and just really giving them the appropriate management and treatment for the sorts of problems that they have with regards to their hearing.
Brilliant. And what made you actually study and go into audiology in the first place?
It was a very random decision. Basically, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do after my A-levels, and I was kind of like researching into different areas that I could go into. I've always been interested in the sciences, so all my A-levels were science-based. And then I randomly came across audiology, and I went to speak to my careers advisor about it. I had like a whole list of like things to do. And she actually turned out to be someone who wore hearing aids, and she had a hearing impairment. And she took them out and she showed them to me, and she was like, this is what hearing aids are, this is what audiologists do. So and as she was talking about it, she also had like balance problems and dizzy problems as well. So her audiologist had gone through lots of different tests with her, and like she was just basically telling me about her experience and what, you know, the different tests that they did and things like that. And the more I listened, the more I became fascinated with it. So eventually I did research into it and I found out a bit more, and that's how I'm here today.
So, alhamdulillah, can you actually explain to us how the ear actually functions?
Yeah, I have a little model of the ear here. Look at that. Okay, so this is basically the ear. So the ear is divided into 3 parts. So we have the outer ear here, and then we have the middle ear here and the inner ear here. So the outer part involves, this is obviously the bit that we can see, and then across down here we have the ear canal, and then sound travels through that, hits the eardrum here, makes that vibrate, and that's basically the outer ear. And then in the middle ear we have these 3 little bones. So once the sound hits the eardrum, it sort of vibrates the 3 little bones, and then that goes into the inner ear here, which is the actual hearing organ. And this is where sounds get transmitted to the brain. Okay, and this here is the balance organs here. Yeah, so that's roughly how it works.
Wow, it's very complicated indeed.
Very complicated. It is a very complex system, yeah, definitely.
Wow, alhamdulillah, that's a very complicated system there. So how many different types of, hearing disabilities or impairments have you come across?
Huge variety of different types of hearing impairment. You can have like a permanent loss, which is caused by things like noise and age, which affects us in the inner ear here, in the hearing organ. Or we can have basic things like infections, which affects us, for example, in the outer ear here and along the eardrum. And we can also have things like genetic diseases, where that affects us in the 3 little bones here, and that stops sound going through. So, because it's such a complex system, it's quite complicated. There's lots of different things that could affect your hearing and stop you from hearing.
Wow. That's fascinating, isn't it? And when I see things like this, I always think, subhanAllah, how can people think there is no God when that's so complicated? That's just an ear that's so complicated.
And that ties in with the hadith that Imam Ali has in the Nahj al-Balagha, where it says, the human is so magnificent, it can hear, it can see via fat, hear via bones, and talk via flesh, which is the tongue. And yeah, that refers to the 3 little bones here. And it's amazing because these are the smallest bones in the body. And if anything happens to these bones, that's it. That can affect your hearing so much. And we take hearing, for granted, and we don't realize, all these different things. And yeah, once it affects you, that's it. It's gone. Yeah.
Absolutely, we do definitely take it for granted. But are these kind of hearing-related problems, are they quite common in our society?
Yeah, in the UK, 1 in 7 person has a hearing difficulty, and 1 in 1,000 baby is born born with a hearing impairment. So it is so common, but people don't realise. And unfortunately, it's not like, you know, like visual impairments where people are willing to sort of put if you have a visual impairment, you put glasses on. With hearing, there's a lot of stigma involved with wearing hearing aids. People associate it with, you know, having a disability, or they associate it with getting older. And not a lot of people do something about it. If they have a hearing impairment, they're very shy about, you know, going to their GP, and they feel like, you know, they can cope without any intervention. But it's such a common problem. We don't even realise that, you know, so many people have hearing impairments. So yeah, it's very common.
What can like cause or lead to these hearing impairments, etc.?
Lots of different things. So, for example, age. Obviously, like with everything else, your body does start to deteriorate once you hit 18, and that does affect your ears as well. So, just because of age, the hair cells in our inner ear organ, in our inner ear, start to deteriorate, and that affects us. We can hear less. Things like noise. If you're exposed to a lot of noise, that affects our hearing. Genetics, if it's in your genes, if it's, you know, passed down, then that affects us as well. So yeah, lots of different things can cause hearing impairments.
What about things like listening to something in your ears? Like lots of people have iPods and MP3 players.
That's becoming more and more common. And yeah, noise exposure. If you listen to loud music for long periods of time, that does have an effect on your ears. And unfortunately, it's not. People don't realise until it's too late, because it affects you in the long term rather than the short term. So if you're someone who finds yourself in, you know, listening to very loud iPods and music and that sort of thing, then you should be aware that it does affect your hearing. There's a lot of research going into it, because things like that have just recently come out. You know, it's quite a new phenomenon where people have been listening to iPods and things. So there's still a lot of research going into it to find out exactly what happens in the long term and how it affects your hearing. But they're finding that a lot of more younger people are getting premature hearing problems and coming in saying they have hearing difficulties, and that's because of the amount of noise they're exposed to. And also, if you work in a very noisy environment, things like machinery, if you're in, you know, for example, if you're in the army or something and you work with gunfire quite regularly, that affects you as well.
So can you tell us what would be the best way to actually clean the ear? Because it looks like it's so sensitive, and I've seen people using all sorts, including keys, and that looks like that could probably be potentially quite damaging.
Yeah, no, that is very damaging. Even things like using earbuds is not, we recommend you don't do that, because sticking anything in your ears is a no-no. The lining here on the ear canal is very, very sensitive, because obviously that's what produces the wax, which is very important for our ears. Wax helps to sort of gather all the infections and debris and dirt in our ear, and it helps to take that back out. If you use cotton buds, you're just pushing the wax further inside. That's not necessarily helping. And also, cotton buds are made of cotton, which is a very rough material, and that damages the lining of the ear there. So don't use cotton buds. Try not to stick anything in your ears. If you do suffer from a lot of wax, using a couple of drops of olive oil before you go to bed each night for a couple of days, that should do the trick. That makes the wax go soft. So when you have a shower or anything, it helps the wax move outside slowly, but you shouldn't try and get the wax out. Just let it come out by itself. That's the best thing to do, yeah.
That's interesting how wax is obviously, good for us, that you're saying, because I remember being a child, and, you know, you always had those ear tests, and they always said, oh, you've got to get your ear syringed or something like that, or have ear drops. So does that mean that it's wrong to go and, you know, have these, you know, when they send their children to kind of have their ears cleaned?
No, it's not wrong, because obviously too much wax can sort of get hard and block your ear, and then that affects your hearing. A lot of children do have that problem, because obviously their ear isn't fully developed, so they tend to produce more wax. But no, it's okay, because obviously they're professionals and they use specialist equipment and things, so they always make sure that they're doing everything properly and not affecting your ear or anything like that. So that's quite okay, to take your children and to go yourself to get your ear syringed and things like that. So that's fine. But just don't poke anything in there yourself. Yeah.
I know earaches are really common, aren't they? Especially you see a lot of young kids, for example, might say they have earaches. But what about things like when you're travelling and your ears pop and they really start hurting? What's the best way to prevent that? Is it true that I've tried chewing gum when you're actually going up in the plane? How does that work?
Basically, what happens is in the middle ear we have this tube here that connects to our nose and our mouth and everything. So it's all very connected. And this tube here, equalizes the pressure in the middle ear, and that makes the sounds get through better and get through more efficiently. Now what happens is when we go on a plane or something like that, you're moving to a different level of pressure, and that blocks the tube up. And because of that, you feel like your ears are blocked up, and that's when the tube sort of opens back up, that's when you get that popping sensation. So it's okay to chew something or just, blow your nose and things like that to make it pop out. Unfortunately, that does cause a lot of pain, but that's quite normal, because what the ear is doing is just trying to sort of open up again. So it's quite normal for you to do that. That's okay.
That's interesting, because some people don't even suffer from the ear popping. Like in my family, some members of the family don't. Why is that? So some people's tubes just in their ears decide to close.
Yes, it just depends on the person. Yeah, different people react differently to different environments. So it's just it depends on the person and how often your tube closes up and things like that. Yeah.
You mentioned dizziness earlier. How is that? Because I know loads of people who get that thing where they feel a little bit lightheaded or dizzy. Is that always associated with the ear, or?
No, not necessarily. Lots of different things can cause dizzy problems, and we maintain our balance not just by the vestibular organ, which is the balance organ, but also things like our eyes and our muscle receptors in our legs and our body helps us to maintain that balance as well. So those are the three things that affects our balance. If you get rid of one of those things, for example, if you start to get visual impairments, then that affects your balance as well. So it's all very connected. Usually if you have a problem in the balance organ, then you get a spinning sensation where you feel the room is spinning. So if you get that sort of sensation, then that's probably something to do with the inner ear. Usually lightheadedness or other sorts of balance problems are to do with other different medical problems. But if you have a spinning sensation, then that's probably related to the inner ear.
What about when sometimes you have this kind of buzzing sound? Like, it's not coming from the telly, it's not coming from you,
it's coming from you.
And you can sort of hear this bzz sound or something. What is that?
The medical term for that is called tinnitus. And basically, that's a sensation where you hear sounds coming from your ear or your head. Basically, what happens is the ear has a very complex filtering system where it tries to tune out things that you don't want to hear and tune into things that you do want to hear. And tinnitus is, we're not 100% sure why it happens. There are lots of theories that surround it, and it's to do with the hearing pathway, about how the sounds gets to your ear, but it's also to do with the filtering system, because what happens is, for example, if you're in a very noisy environment, the brain tries to get rid of the background noise and just focus on what people are saying and tunes into that. Now, once your hearing pathway starts to make that tinnitus sound, you hear it and your filtering system tunes into that and you can hear it louder, and the more you listen to it, the more it affects you and the more it bothers you. So some people can hear it louder and it intrudes more in their life than other people, and it's just because you're tuning into that, and it's very subconscious. You don't realize you're doing it and you sort of tune in and it gets louder and louder. So we manage people who do have tinnitus as a problem, and we sort of help to habituate to that and sort of make people understand about how to distract yourself away from it, so you're not focusing on it so much. And
wow, that's so fascinating, isn't it?
I hear little voices in my head all the time, usually telling me to stop being such a loser. So, as part of your job, do you test little children's ears a lot when they come in for these? Is it like a beep test? Do you do that?
I don't. I work mainly with adults. I don't work with children. But yes, we do. Audiologists do test children's hearing. There are lots of different ways to do that. Of course, we have the newborn hearing screening program that has just recently come out. The government initiated that, and where they screen every newborn's hearing to see to work out how their hearing is. So that's like a little beeping test where they sort of put a probe in your ear and test the child's hearing, which is like a 2-second test. But also, if we find out that the child has a hearing impairment, then there are lots of different ways we can try to figure out exactly how severe it is. So if we have a baby, then we do brain scans. It's an electrophysiological test where we do a brain scan to find out, and that tells us how severe the loss is and where the problem is exactly. exactly in the ear. If it's an older child, we have behavioral testing where we play sounds to them through a speaker and then reward them with, if they listen to the sound, then we reward them with lights or toys or things like that. And from that we can tell exactly, how much they're hearing and how much they're not hearing.
Wow.
Yeah.
So do you mostly, where does an audiologist mostly work? Do you work in hospitals or do you?
Yeah, I work in a hospital. Mainly it's in the NHS that the audiologists sort of work. But we also have audiologists in the private sector. So you can go to, for example, Specsavers or Boots to get hearing aids and get your hearing tested. So yeah, it could be either way. We also have, research. Audiologists do go into research as well, to obviously, because it's such a wide topic and such a complex thing, the ear, that we still have lots of things to explore and figure out. So you can also go into research as well.
You just mentioned hearing aids. Could you talk about that? Is that the most common thing that elderly people come to you about?
Yes, if you have a hearing impairment, then hearing aids is one of the options that we can give you, but it's not the only option. It depends very much on what, how active you are in your life and exactly where you're having most difficulties. If you're someone who's quite young and you have difficulties in all aspects of your life, then hearing aids would be the best option because it helps you in all situations. If you're someone, for example, who's only having difficulties with the TV or with the phone, then we can help you in those areas rather than give a hearing aid. So it very much depends on where you're having most difficulties.
And how would someone who is perhaps in in their late 50s, 60s and is a little bit unsure about whether they would need to go to someone for help, like for example, I have relatives who you feel that you need to start speaking quite loudly for them to actually hear you.
Yeah.
Would that be a sign for them to get checked out straight away, or is that quite normal?
Hearing loss is very gradual most of the time. It's a sort of gradual process. So yeah, for example, if you have to speak up for them to hear, if they feel like lots of people are mumbling, if, for example, they need to turn the TV up or they're having difficulties in background noise, especially, that's where most people find difficulties, then that's a sign that perhaps your hearing is slowly deteriorating. But again, it very much depends on the sort of situations you find yourself in. Sometimes people with mild losses can get away with it. They don't need any help because it's a very mild loss and they don't really need anything. But sometimes we have people who have very mild losses, but because they work, for example, in a school, children's voices tend to be in the high pitches and we lose more in the high pitches and the low pitches. So for example, situations like that, they would need hearing aids because they find themselves in that situation quite a lot, whereas other people may get away with it. So it very much depends on the sort of environments you find yourself in and how much of a problem you have. But if you feel that you do have a problem, then it's always a good idea to just go to your GP and get it checked, just to see where you're at. You don't necessarily need to go for hearing aids or anything, but just to sort of give you, the audiologist can even give you tips and communication. You can talk about communication tactics and how to best sort of try and overcome that difficulty. So it doesn't necessarily have to be hearing aids.
Wow, well, thank you so much for coming in, Sister Mahdiyya, for talking to us about audiology. What a fascinating subject, and I've learned a lot today. So thank you so much for coming in.
No, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I need to stop using cotton buds. Okay, right, it's time to go to a quick break before we go on to the final segment of the show. So there's just enough time to grab a quick cup of coffee and we'll see you after the break.
Us what that is.
Okay, in a nutshell, audiology is the study of hearing imbalance. So I've learned about different types of hearing imbalance disorders, and basically my job involves working with people who have hearing impairments, measuring their hearing, issuing hearing aids, and just really giving them the appropriate management and treatment for the sorts of problems that they have with regards to their hearing.
Brilliant. And what made you actually study and go into audiology in the first place?
It was a very random decision. Basically, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do after my A-levels, and I was kind of like researching into different areas that I could go into. I've always
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to part 2 of Morning Break. We hope you've enjoyed the show so far and stay tuned because we still have lots to come.
Now it's time to introduce our special guest. Our guest today is Sister Mahdiyya Sachoo, who is an audiologist. Assalamu alaikum, Sister.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
No, my pleasure.
Sister, I don't actually know personally what audiology is. Could you just explain to us?
I've been interested in the sciences, so all my A-levels were science-based. And then I randomly came across audiology, and I went to speak to my careers advisor about it. I had like a whole list of like things to do. And she actually turned out to be someone who wore hearing aids, and she had a hearing impairment. And she took them out and she showed them to me, and she was like, this is what hearing aids are, this is what audiologists do. So, and as she was talking about it, she also had like balance problems and dizzy problems as well. So her audiologist had gone through lots of different tests with her, and like she was just basically telling me about her experience and what, you know, the different tests that they did and things like that. And the more I listened, the more I became fascinated with it. So eventually I did research into it. Makes that vibrate, and that's basically the outer ear. And then in the middle ear we have these three little bones. So once the sound hits the eardrum, it sort of vibrates the three little bones, and then that goes into the inner ear here, which is the actual hearing organ. And this is where sounds get transmitted to the brain. Okay, and this here is the balance organs here. Yeah, so that's roughly how it works.
Wow, it's very complicated indeed.
Very complicated. It is a very complex system, yeah, definitely.
Wow, alhamdulillah, that's a very complicated system there. So how many different types of, you know...
And I found out a bit more, and that's how I'm here today.
So alhamdulillah, can you actually explain to us how the ear actually functions?
Yeah, I have a little model of the ear here. Look at that. Okay, so this is basically the ear. So the ear is divided into three parts. So we have the outer ear here, and then we have the middle ear here and the inner ear here. So the outer part involves, this is obviously the bit that we can see, and then across down here we have the ear canal, and then sound travels through that, hits the eardrum here.